I was halfway through mowing the front lawn when I noticed my mailbox. It was gone. Not just vandalized or knocked over. Gone. Vanished. Ripped clean out of the ground. I stood there, sweating under the Georgia sun, staring at the empty patch of dirt where my black cast iron mailbox used to be. It was bolted into concrete. Whoever took it meant business. Looking for something, Mr. Vance? I turned and saw her Gloria Bradford, HOA president and full-time menace with a bob haircut sharp enough to slice cement. She stood on the curb, arms folded, lips pursed like she'd swallowed a lemon. "Gloria," I said, wiping my brow, "you wouldn't happen to know why my mailbox disappeared, would you?" She sniffed. "Yes. I ordered it removed this morning. It didn't meet community aesthetic guidelines." Guidelines? I blinked. That mailbox has been there for 15 years. Well, the board voted that all mailboxes must be colonial white with bronze trim. Yours was black, and frankly, it was outdated. We sent a notice. "No, you didn't," I said flatly. She pulled a folded letter from her purse. "This was taped to your door Tuesday." I scanned it. No HOA letterhead. Just a cheap inkjet printout with typos and no signature. "This isn't official," I said. "And you know it. I suggest you install a compliant box before the week is out, or you'll face daily fines." I was too stunned to speak. Gloria spun on her heel and stormed off like she'd won something. That night, I drove around the neighborhood. And guess what? My mailbox was the only one missing. And there were at least 3 others that were still black. 2 days went by. I used a temporary mail hold and waited for the HOA to come to its senses. But when I got home Thursday, I found something worse than a missing mailbox. A new one had been installed about 10 feet to the right, half on my neighbor's property, crooked and already dented. It was white with bronze trim, all right, but not even the same model as the rest. Total junk. And taped to it? A bright orange fine notice. $50. That's when I stopped playing nice. I called the local post office first. Then I made another call to the United States Postal Inspection Service. "This your property line?" the inspector asked the next morning, crouching by the mailbox. "Yep, I've got the survey documents. Want a copy?" He nodded. "And you didn't move this mailbox yourself?" "No. The HOA president ordered it removed without any authorization from me or the USPS. He stood, pulled out his phone, and snapped photos. Then he turned to me. "Mr. Vance, tampering with mailboxes is a federal offense, even if it's the HOA." I almost laughed, but it wasn't funny yet. Not until I saw what was coming next. The USPS inspector didn't waste time. He left my property with a folder of evidence tucked under his arm and a hard set to his jaw. By the following afternoon, I was sitting on my front steps drinking coffee when a dark blue government sedan pulled into the neighborhood. It rolled past my house and stopped in front of the HOA clubhouse. 2 men stepped out. One wore a federal windbreaker, the other a suit with a badge clipped to his belt. They weren't here for a friendly chat. From my porch, I watched as they walked up the steps and knocked. The door opened, and Gloria appeared wearing a pastel sweater and an expression that could curdle milk. She didn't invite them in, but they didn't wait for her approval either. The agent in the windbreaker held up a sheet of paper, said something I couldn't hear, and pointed inside. Gloria hesitated, her arms crossed, then stepped aside stiffly and let them in. I didn't move from my spot, but I saw the blinds twitch in half a dozen homes. Word would spread fast. Roughly 20 minutes later, the agents left with a cardboard box sealed with evidence tape. Gloria followed them out, her face pale, her lips drawn so tight they nearly disappeared. She said something to the man in the windbreaker. He didn't respond, just opened the trunk, loaded the box, and got behind the wheel. They drove off without another word. I didn't have to wonder what they'd taken. That crooked, dented mailbox had been yanked out again, this time by someone with gloves and authority. Later that evening, I got a call from a neighbor I trusted, Eli, a retired army mechanic who lived 4 doors down. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. "You hear what happened?" "I saw it," I said, "but I wouldn't mind hearing your version." "Feds pulled the clubhouse's security DVR," Eli said. "Turns out Gloria had one of the maintenance guys dig up your box on camera. No work order, no vote, no nothing. Just told him to make it disappear. Supposedly said it was a personal priority. Maintenance guy cooperating? Like a canary. Said she threatened to have him fired if he didn't do it that morning. Didn't even know it was illegal. Thought it was just another HOA power trip." I leaned back against the railing. "And the new box?" "From her garage. She bought it herself. Claimed it was a community-approved model. But it's not even on the list. Never was. She just slapped it in to make a point." That night, I filed a formal complaint with the county zoning board and the city code enforcement office. I included copies of my property survey, pictures of the mailbox's new location, and the incident report the inspector had left with me. I didn't have to embellish anything. The facts were ugly enough on their own. By Friday morning, code enforcement was on site with a laser rangefinder and a clipboard. They measured distances, checked line of sight visibility from the street, and took photos from multiple angles. I kept a respectful distance but made sure they saw me watching. The lead officer, a no-nonsense woman named Riva, approached me when they wrapped up. "Mr. Vance, your property lines are clearly documented, and the mailbox's placement was in violation of multiple setback codes. Additionally, we've confirmed that no permit was filed for relocation." I raised an eyebrow. "You need a permit to move a mailbox?" "In this county, yes. Especially when it's being moved onto another parcel and obstructs view from a driveway." I nodded slowly. "And what about the HOA?" "We've received a subpoena request from the Postal Inspector's office," she said. "Federal jurisdiction takes precedence here. Local fines may apply, but the bigger issue is unauthorized tampering with a federally registered delivery point." She handed me a card. "If anyone from the board contacts you directly, forward it to this number. No need to engage." That afternoon, the HOA sent out a mass email. No apology. No acknowledgement. Just a bland announcement that mailbox standardization efforts have been postponed pending review. Gloria's name wasn't on it. It was signed by the vice president, a man I'd never seen at a single community event. I printed the email and pinned it to my bulletin board. Then I opened a new folder on my laptop titled HOA Mayhem. Later that weekend, I visited the county records office. I'd had a hunch ever since the mailbox nonsense started, and I wanted to dig deeper. It took 2 hours of sifting through digital permits and paper filings, but I found it. A zoning variance request submitted 6 months ago by the HOA board, seeking to redefine community property boundaries for uniform landscaping. The language was vague, but the map overlay made it clear. They tried to redraw lot lines by a few feet in each direction to claim slivers of everyone's property as common buffer zones. My lot was one of them. The request had been denied. Twice. Gloria had signed the second appeal herself. And yet, here she was acting like those denials didn't exist. I made copies of everything and drove straight to the city council building. I knew someone there, Marisol Tran, an urban planning consultant I'd helped get elected last year. She owed me a favor. Marisol met me in her office and I laid out the evidence. She tried to annex parts of private property into HOA control. I said, "This wasn't just about mailboxes. This was step 1. Marisol flipped through the copies, her expression sharpening with each page. "This is a zoning violation, property rights infringement, and now a federal probe," she said. "I'll escalate this to the city attorney's office. You mind if I keep these?" "They're yours," I said. I've got digital backups. She looked up. You planning to rally the other homeowners? Already started. People are fed up. And they're finally asking questions. Marisol leaned back in her chair. Good. Because with this kind of pressure, I can motion for a temporary freeze on all HOA enforcement actions until an investigation is completed. I left her office feeling lighter than I had in weeks. By the following Wednesday, the freeze motion passed. The HOA's ability to issue fines, enforce rules, or make alterations to any property was suspended pending the outcome of the federal and municipal investigations. Gloria didn't show her face for days. When she finally did emerge at a hastily arranged emergency board meeting in the clubhouse, she looked like someone who'd aged 10 years in a week. The room was packed. Homeowners lined the walls. Eli stood beside me, arms crossed, while Marisol sat quietly near the back with a legal pad. Gloria cleared her throat at the podium. There's been some confusion regarding recent enforcement actions. Cut the fluff, someone called from the back. You broke the law, another voice chimed in. You tried to steal our land. Gloria's composure cracked. The board was acting in the community's best interest. Our intention was to streamline. You falsified the mailing notice, I said loudly. You moved private property without consent, and you ignored 2 zoning denials. She glanced at the vice president, who looked like he wanted to sink into the floor. I will be stepping back from my role as president while the matter is resolved, Gloria said stiffly. Effective immediately. The room erupted. I didn't cheer. I didn't clap. I just watched as she stepped down from the podium, walked through the crowd, and slipped out the side door without a word. The HOA would survive, but not in its current form. And the days of forged notices, secret votes, and personal power trips, those were over. By the weekend, a quiet but unmistakable shift swept through the neighborhood. For the first time in years, people were talking in their driveways again, not just neighborly waves or passing nods, but real conversations. Lawns that had once been trimmed to regulation length with military precision now showed signs of defiance. Garden gnomes, string lights, even a few rogue bird baths that had once been deemed aesthetic liabilities. The fear had cracked, and underneath it, a deep well of resentment bubbled to the surface. I wasn't surprised when my doorbell rang early Sunday morning. What did surprise me was who was standing there. Thomas Griggs, the former HOA treasurer, who hadn't been seen in public since the last audit scandal 2 years ago. Back then, a few $1,000s had mysteriously vanished from the landscaping budget, and Gloria had chalked it up to a clerical error. Thomas had resigned shortly after, claiming health issues. Now he looked restless, nervous. I need to show you something, he said, glancing over his shoulder. I led him to the kitchen and poured 2 cups of coffee. He didn't touch his. I kept records, he began. After I stepped down, I couldn't prove anything, not on paper. But I took copies. All of them. Bank transfers, vendor contracts, expense authorizations with forged signatures, Gloria's mainly. I've been sitting on them for over a year. I narrowed my eyes. Why now? Because you're the first person who's actually landed a punch, he said. And the board's finally vulnerable. If I give this to the city attorney, they'll say I should have come forward sooner. I might get pulled into it, but if you handle it. I took the manila folder he slid across the table. Inside were over 50 pages of financial documents, each marked with color-coded tabs. Some were receipts for services that had never been performed. Others were checks written to companies that didn't exist. At the bottom was a spreadsheet with monthly withdrawals over the course of 2 years. Nearly $30,000 had disappeared under the guise of beautification initiatives and emergency landscaping restoration. Where did it go? I asked. He hesitated. Gloria's nephew owns a shell company in Savannah. She funneled everything through that. He's not even a landscaper. He works in car audio. I stared at the paper for several seconds before asking, "And none of the other board members knew?" "Some knew," he admitted, "but they kept quiet. She ran everything like a dictatorship. If you questioned her, she'd slap you with a violation or leak personal info to the gossip chain. That's why I left. But I didn't have the stomach to take it public." I folded the folder shut. "You do now." He nodded once and stood. "Just don't tell anyone it came from me." After he left, I scanned every page and emailed copies to Marisol. She replied within the hour, "Got it. This changes everything. I'll call in a forensic auditor." By Monday morning, the city attorney's office had filed a motion to seize the HOA's financial records, not a request a court-ordered seizure. A sheriff's deputy served the order just after dawn while a city auditor followed with 2 banker's boxes and a laptop. The clubhouse was officially closed until further notice. That same day, the vice president, now acting president, resigned without comment. 3 other board members followed suit by the end of the week. What was once a 5-person board was reduced to a single name, Gloria Bradford, and she wasn't answering calls. That changed when the police showed up. On Thursday, 2 cruisers rolled into the neighborhood just after noon. Gloria's car was parked in her driveway, but she didn't come to the door when the officers knocked. They waited exactly 90 seconds before one of them circled to the back. A sliding door opened, and moments later, Gloria was escorted out in handcuffs, her face ashen, her eyes darting to every window on the block. No one filmed it. No one needed to. The silence was louder than any camera. I got the full breakdown from Marisol that evening. Charges were being filed for embezzlement, fraud, and obstruction. The postal tampering had triggered the federal probe, but the financial evidence had opened the floodgates. The city had fast-tracked the case due to the sheer volume of affected residents. She was also being investigated for unauthorized surveillance. Turns out, she'd installed small security cameras on common property facing select houses, mine included, all without disclosure or board approval. The footage had been routed to a personal cloud account, which the forensic team uncovered during their sweep. "They're preparing a racketeering case," Marisol told me. "It won't be quick, but it'll be thorough. She's not getting out of this." With the board dissolved, the HOA fell under temporary receivership. A neutral third-party management company was appointed by the city to oversee basic services, trash collection, landscaping, community maintenance, but all enforcement actions were frozen indefinitely. That weekend, I hosted a barbecue. It wasn't a petty victory party, though no one could pretend the timing was coincidental. I grilled ribs, Eli brought his famous cornbread, and neighbors I hadn't spoken to in years came bearing drinks, desserts, and stories. Real ones, like the single mom on Hemlock Drive who'd been fined for leaving her trash can out 10 minutes past pickup, even though she was at the hospital with her sick kid. Or the elderly couple at the end of the cul-de-sac who'd been threatened with legal action for painting their shutters cream instead of ivory because ivory matched better with the approved palette. Or the veteran who'd received 3 warning letters in 8 weeks for parking his truck half an inch over the painted driveway line. Every story added weight to the same truth. This wasn't about rules. It never had been. It was about control. By the time the sun dipped behind the rooftops, people were already asking, "What comes next?" No one wanted the HOA gone entirely. Some rules made sense. But they wanted transparency, accountability, elections that weren't rigged by proxy ballots and whispered favors. "We need bylaws with teeth," Eli said, setting down his plate. "The kind that bite both ways." "We need term limits too," someone added. "And an audit every year. Mandatory." "I want a say in how my fees get used," said the woman from Hemlock. "I don't care about imported mulch if we've got cracks in the sidewalks." I didn't speak much during the meeting that followed. I just listened and took notes. But when someone asked who would oversee the transition committee, all heads turned to me. I didn't say yes right away. I didn't need to. The look in their eyes told me it wasn't a request. It was a call to service. So I accepted with one condition. Everything would be documented. Every meeting, every vote, every expenditure. No more backroom deals. No more whispers. When Monday came, I drafted a new charter. I submitted it to the City Oversight Board for review. It included term limits, mandatory audits, a public voting schedule, and a clause that barred any one household from holding more than one board position at a time. It also required that all enforcement actions be supported by photographic evidence, signed documentation, and a third-party review. No more forged notices. No more surprise removals. By the time the city approved the new charter, Gloria had been formally indicted. Her trial date was set for the following spring. She faced over a dozen counts, including federal charges. Her nephew was still under review, but his shell company had been dissolved and its accounts frozen. The mailbox that started it all was reinstalled at no cost to me and in its original location. This time, courtesy of the city in partnership with the USPS. A small plaque at its base read, "Restored by order of federal compliance." It was the most poetic thing I'd ever seen. Not dramatic, not flashy, just a quiet testament to what happens when someone decides they've had enough. That mailbox wasn't just a box anymore. It was a line in the dirt. And everyone knew better than to try crossing it again. The first meeting of the newly formed Transition Committee took place in the Community Library Annex, a modest, carpeted room with flickering fluorescent lights and a dozen folding chairs that hadn't seen use since the last hurricane prep seminar. No one missed the clubhouse. In fact, not a single resident even mentioned it. I sat at the head of the table with a legal pad, a thermos of strong coffee, and a copy of the draft charter beside me. Across from me sat a mix of neighbors, a retired school principal, a young paralegal named Jada who had just moved in last spring, and a software developer who volunteered to build a public archive for all HOA records. They weren't there for titles. They were there because they were tired of being ruled by fear disguised as order. "We'll need a forensic accounting firm," Jada said, flipping through the list of registered vendors. "The city audit only went back 2 years. I want to know what happened before that." "I can reach out to a firm in Atlanta," said the principal. "They do nonprofit audits. Full transparency reports." "We'll need votes to ratify the new charter," I said. "I don't want this to be another rubber stamp situation. Real ballots, physical and digital, one per household. No proxies." The developer raised a hand. "I can design a secure portal. The residents can log in using parcel ID and utility verification. No fake ballots. No ballot stuffing." It was only the first meeting, but the room felt nothing like the old board. No power posturing. No whispering behind hands. Just people trying to fix what had been broken for far too long. 2 days later, a letter arrived addressed to me from the city's Department of Judicial Affairs. It was an official notification that the State Attorney General's office had opened a separate investigation into the HOA's conduct, citing potential violations of the Georgia Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. The letter included a list of offenses under review, not just the embezzlement, but also unlawful surveillance, property encroachment, and misuse of fiduciary authority. Gloria wasn't the only one under the microscope anymore. Several former board members were now persons of interest. I brought the letter to the next committee meeting and read it aloud. No one spoke for a full minute. Then Jada leaned forward. "If they start issuing subpoenas, we'll need legal representation as a community. Not just the city's lawyers. Someone who answers to us." The software developer nodded. "We could vote to allocate emergency funds. Hire a civil rights firm that specializes in HOA abuse cases. I know a few, I said. I'll make some calls. But the real shift came later that week, when a plain white van rolled up to Gloria's house and parked in the driveway. A team of investigators stepped out, flanked by a uniformed officer holding a warrant. They didn't knock. They didn't wait. They entered through the front door unlocked, apparently, and emerged hours later carrying boxes, hard drives, and one battered desktop computer. The neighbor across the street, a nurse named Clara who'd never spoken more than 2 words to me before, walked over as I was checking my mail. "She had cameras in my backyard," she said quietly. "I found one mounted in the trees last month. Thought it was a birdhouse until it blinked." "Did you report it?" I didn't know who to trust, but I'm glad someone finally did something. That night, an emergency email blast from the city confirmed what many had suspected. Gloria had not acted alone. At least 2 former board members had helped her funnel association funds into private accounts. One of them had used HOA money to pay off their mortgage early. The other had purchased a second vehicle under a fake landscaping account. The city froze all HOA-controlled accounts pending litigation. A temporary budget was established for essentials only: street lighting, trash pickup, and security patrols. No new fines, no new projects, no new policies. The community felt like it could breathe again. But we still had one more issue to address: the mailbox. The plaque at its base had drawn curious glances and quiet admiration, but it wasn't just a symbol. It was a federal delivery point, and its tampering had kicked off the entire collapse. So when a letter arrived from the U.S. Postal Inspection Service asking if I'd be willing to give a statement at the upcoming federal hearing, I didn't hesitate. The hearing took place in Atlanta, in a clean, windowless courtroom with gray walls, and a judge who looked like he'd seen every trick in the book. Gloria sat across the room, flanked by 2 attorneys. She looked smaller now, her hair pulled back tightly, no accessories, no pastel sweaters. Just a woman who had run out of levers to pull. I took the stand and told my story. Not just about the mailbox, but the fake notices, the threatened fines, the secret votes, and the illegal camera I'd later found buried in the hedge near my garage. The judge listened without interruption. So did the federal prosecutor, who nodded once when I handed over the final piece of evidence: a photograph of the mailbox's original foundation, still bearing the marks of forced removal. It was time-stamped, geotagged, and certified by the Postal Inspector who had first responded to my call. When I stepped down, Gloria's attorney tried to argue that the mailbox was removed as part of a broad beautification effort approved by the majority of homeowners. The judge raised an eyebrow and asked for the vote tally. There wasn't one. 3 weeks later, the verdict came down: guilty on 6 counts of mail tampering, 2 counts of fraudulent document issuance, and a federal charge of obstruction of a postal investigation. Gloria was sentenced to 18 months in federal prison, with an additional 5 years of probation. She was barred from holding any position of authority in a housing association for life. The 2 former board members who had assisted her received suspended sentences, community service, and were ordered to repay the stolen funds in full with interest. Their names were entered into the state's fraud registry for public record. The city immediately began implementing a new oversight framework for HOAs, using our neighborhood as the model. Monthly audits, open access to financial ledgers, and mandatory rotating leadership became standard across several nearby communities. Back home, the transition committee wrapped up its duties after 6 months. The new board was elected by a verified majority. Jada became president. Eli agreed to serve as vice president, reluctantly but firmly. I declined any formal title, preferring instead to act as a liaison to the city and state offices when needed. The software developer launched a public archive website that stored everything: meeting minutes, financial records, vote tallies, even landscaping schedules. Nothing was hidden. Nothing could be altered without a full community vote. One evening in early spring, I stood by the mailbox, sipping tea as the sun dipped behind the poplars. A kid on a bike rode past and waved. A few houses down, Clara was planting flowers along her fence line, unbothered by the old rule about unauthorized color palettes. The air felt clearer. Justice didn't come all at once. It arrived in pieces, forms, hearings, scanned documents, and one very determined postal inspector. But it came, and it stayed. The HOA didn't vanish. It evolved, from a weapon into a tool, from fear into function. And that small patch of ground where my old mailbox once stood, that's where the fight began. Not just for me, but for everyone who'd been told to sit down and pay up while someone else made the rules. That ground belonged to me, and it always had.